Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Recruit Military Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, mil-spouse employment, and much, much more. My name is Lucas Conley, retired U.S. Army officer and former TAP program manager, here to share with you the ins and outs of navigating the turbulent waters of civilian transition. If you're in search of meaningful employment as you leave the military and head out into the civilian world where you're in the right place, please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. All right, folks, are you getting ready to transition out of the military? Is it time to hang up those boots for the last time? Are you unsure what you should be doing to prepare? Well, if you answered yes to both of those questions, you're in the right place, so don't touch that mouse. Today's topic is preparing for a deliberate transition. How a transition to the civilian world can and should be treated like a deliberate military operation. We have a lot of material to cover today, so stay on board for the whole show. You won't regret it, and you just might learn a thing or two. We're joined today by a very special guest coming to us live from Elmore, Ohio. He's a U.S. Army veteran, an accomplished author, a public speaker, and has been a talent management coach with over 25 years of experience in human resources. That's a long time. He is the president and chief advisor at Kieffer and Associates, where, amongst other things, he can pursue his passion for coaching service members transitioning to civilian careers. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Kieffer back to the show. Bill, welcome.
Hey, Lucas. How you doing, man? Good to be back.
I'm doing great. It really is great. This is your third appearance on our show. Every time it's a pleasure, and it just seems to get better every time you show your face. Now, folks, now that you know who we are, let us know who you are. Hit us up in that chat window. Let us know where you're watching from, who you're with, who you served with, what your status is. Are you in transition, retiring, moving to the National Guard, into the reserves? What are you looking for out there for career? Is there anything we can help you with? Do you have any questions, comments, or concerns? Any of that stuff, just jump in the chat and share with us, and we'll get after it, time allowing. Okay, folks, let's dig in. Bill, we just talked for a little while recently about career transitions, about the challenges of transitioning to the civilian workforce after a long period of military service. You've compared that transition experience to stepping onto the career battlefield. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to. Years ago, I taught the Officer Advanced course for the logistics folks in the Army, and we did intelligence prep of the battlefield, right? Looking at the potential battlefield and all the various IPB. There you go. Looking at the various battlefield dimensions to understand what you're getting yourself into. And to me, it seems like career transition could benefit from that kind of work because in some regards, it is kind of a battlefield. It's an unfamiliar place. It's full of different players and different processes and requires different tools and techniques. And each transition is its own unique space, right? You're no longer where you've been. You're not yet where you're going. And it's kind of a swamp you have to walk through, right? So I liken it to a career battlefield in that you have to prepare well for that which is coming if you really want to be successful.
Right. You have to wade in. You can't box around this obstacle.
Yeah, you can try, but you won't have an optimally successful result, and you're probably not going to have nearly as much fun along the way.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. So in moving into the deliberate defense, now military operations are sometimes referred to as a hasty operation or a deliberate operation. We've dug hasty fighting positions. We've created deliberate defensive positions. Each one of them has its own unique set of tasks and based on the amount of time you have available and the resources. How does this compare to the transition to civilian life?
Well, yeah. If you kind of do things hasty, sometimes you don't get the best, or sometimes you have to be hasty. I get it. But doing things deliberately helps you best prepare and best succeed. If we understand the battlefield we're going into as well as we can in the time we have available, we're more likely to be successful. Well, similarly with deliberately planning for your transition. I like to say you can't cram for the transition exam.
Nope.
And, a hasty defense or a hasty operation in transition, for most people, one, isn't necessary. We're all going to take off the uniform someday. Now, sometimes it happens a little sooner than some of us might have thought. It might happen in a little different manner than we might have expected. but that doesn't mean you have to be hasty or sloppy about it, right? One of the things I always tell people is, start transition work now. Even if all that means is, what am I going to do 5, 10, 15 years down the road when this uniform comes off? Because it will come off.
Right. And you would think that, when we extend this metaphor, we say, what is it? Let's take the deliberate defense, for example, right? When prepping for a deliberate defense, you are not in contact with the enemy. You have time and space to make preparations. So understanding that you may be 1 year or 2 years out from separation, or coming into the military as a brand new private or a brand new second lieutenant, knowing, yes, one day this will end, you would think that's the time to prepare and not, be waiting until 3 months out to have to dig a hasty.
Yeah, well, and I get it. I mean, when I first joined the military, the last thing I was thinking about was getting out. I'm still trying to figure out how to lace my boots and, not screw things up. So it's a little bit of a difference between urgent and important.
Yes.
As you're entering your career, you got to deal with some urgent things. You got to make good entry. You got to make a contribution. You got to be a great team member, a great leader in the position you're in. You got to build and you got to do your job today. Always going to have to perform well in the job you're in. So I get it. Leaving 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years down the road may not be a top priority, and probably shouldn't be a top priority for everybody. But man, it ought to be on your list of things to consider and make it part of your life and routine. Just, every once in a while, grab a cup of coffee or whatever you choose to drink, and go, what am I going to be when I grow up? And maybe that's all it is when you're young and early in your career. But maybe as you get along, it ought to be something a little bit more deliberate and a little more rigorous.
Absolutely. And I think so many senior leaders, especially those master sergeants out there, those field grade officers, they get really jammed up in the immediate and put off their planning for transition because, and how many times I've heard it, look, I can't think about that right now. I'm planning for our next mass tech. I can't think about that right now. I'm planning for JRTC, but guess what? You are a S3 shop of one. And at some point in time, you better start looking at plans before current ops eats up all of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people you got to be your own chief marketing officer, right? Nobody cares more about your career than you, especially when you're out in the civilian world. In the military, regardless of branch or service, you've got a great procedure and process and systems and tools and resources around you to deal with career management, career progression, related training, assignments, and man, come transition time, unless you build a network of capable people to help, you're a team of one. Making that realization when you jump into the transition battlefield is a little bit late. That's why I say you got to start early and you got to think about, what's this going to look like? That's why I'm really passionate about dealing with folks, because I've seen far too many people leave the military, attempt to enter the civilian world,
struggle,
and have absolutely no idea what they're doing or how to do it. It's mind-boggling, And
I love that you reference resources, because going into a deliberate military operation, one of the things you're asked to do is consider the resources available. All right. You may be, you may have mortar systems, you may have artillery systems, you may have armor, you may have tanks, you may have launchers, you may have air support, you may have engineers, and leaving what we used to call those battlefield operating systems, in reserve is just not smart. So similarly, I think, look at the resources around you and leverage everything that's out there. I mean, am I making sense here?
No, absolutely. And that's a great point. The difference is, if you don't build that base of resources for your transition, it's not going to exist. Now, there are great tools and groups and veteran service organization, a bunch of things out there. But if you're not actively, deliberately seeking out these resources, if you're not making contact with them, if you're not establishing relationships with them, or whatever those resources are, you're not going to have them at your disposal. Not that they're not there, you just haven't tapped into them yet. So, you kind of have to look towards tomorrow, and you got to understand what's out there, and then you have to take action to go out and shake the hand, make the contact, make the call, hit them up on LinkedIn, however you do it, so you can at least have the contact and perhaps develop into a connection build a relationship so they can become a resource or maybe even an advocate for you for future potential positions.
So when we're getting down into that transition space and we make that first contact with TAP, let's take a look at the resource battle space, almost like your own joint staff. You got financial advisors, you got education advisors, you got classes about the transition activities you need to be doing in the next 12 to 24 months. You've got TAP counselors. You've got State Department of Veterans Affairs folks. You've got VFW. You've got VSOs. You've got USO. And all these folks are in your corner just waiting for you to knock on the door, make an appointment, and start leveraging them for your transition success. Have I left anything out?
No, I think, and I love the way you said that. They're out there in your corner waiting for you to knock on their door.
They're not going to call you.
Don't expect them to come knocking on yours.
Yep.
That's not how it works. You know, there's a gazillion people out in the world. They don't have time or ability to go out and knock on everybody else's door. They are there, most of them with great intent, great capability, and great potential value for you. But you got to go knock on their door. And that's another thing. I talked to a lot of folks in transition, military or otherwise. Most folks that you talk to in transition, they want to help. They're perfectly willing to help if you approach them, you establish some manner of connection, and you actually have an ask. You know what you're asking for. You know, one of the things I've talked to some folks over the years, and I go, well, how can I help you? They go, I don't know. I just need a job. Mm-hmm. Okay, so job search. Got it. What do you want to do? I don't know. I can do anything.
So go to McDonald's.
I can't help you if you don't know what kind of help
achieved.
You need.
Yeah. So fine, go to McDonald's. Objective achieved. You've had a job. What's your next step?
Yeah. And that's not necessarily something we can fault our military veterans or others in job search. It's a tough time. It's a whole new world. They don't know what they don't know. I was talking to somebody yesterday. I said, I know what I know. I know what I don't know, but I don't know what I don't know.
We go. The Rumsfeld is,
and that's a huge.
We're never going to get away from Rumsfeld.
I think a lot of people forget. You know.
And I love that you said, you have to knock on their door. If you want priority of CAS support and you want an AC-130 gunship loitering over your objective, guess what? You better make the phone call to the ALO, because they're not going to call you and say, hey, I understand you guys have an attack going on tonight. Would you like some gunship support? No, you've got to make that request and compete with other people for that resource nonetheless.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now let's put that in the job search and career transition context. Here you come with great capability, probably very little credibility yet with employers because you haven't worked in their company, their industry, their field, their markets, right? Your competition for the jobs that you seek is not just other military veterans that are similarly situated. It's civilians.
Oh, yeah.
That have been working in that industry, in that field, in that market. They know the battle space better than you do.
Or folks that might already be working for that company and they've got their not 1 foot, but 2 feet in the door.
Sure. So you got to understand that credibility is not the same as capability. You have capability, but you got to understand how to tell that story, to share that capability and knowledge of that capability with potential employers, network partners, and others in a way that causes them to go, ooh, he's kind of credible for this. Let's keep talking. And let's see if he's credible enough to convince me that he or she is the right person to join my team and successfully do the work I need done and fit well and be a great member of the team.
Absolutely. So now that we've kind of taken a look at our resources, we understand who we are, right? Sun Tzu might say, know yourself, know your enemy. Now, we don't necessarily want to refer to the employer as the enemy. Think of it as an objective if you need to. But Sun Tzu would say, know the enemy. All right. So how do we know, for lack of a better term, our enemy, our objective? How about a little bit of that S2X? Can we get some human?
Yeah, I mean, you got to understand that the transition world, the transition environment, the transition battle space, if you will, includes employers. And this is one of the things that I find constantly amazing about transition discussions. There doesn't seem to be enough coverage of what employers seek beyond, hey, here's a job posting, or here's a phone number, or here's the link to apply for the job. It's really what are these? That's why I wrote the book, to give people a peek behind the curtain to say, what is it they're looking for beyond what the job title says, right? So if you want to land somewhere well in a particular industry, a particular geography, whatever your target area is, don't forget to engage with employers. That doesn't mean every contact is a job interview. Let's say you want to go to where's your favorite spot in the U.S., Lucas? Where would you want to go?
Well, if I could work anywhere, probably by the sunny shores of Lake George, New York, where I spent so much time as a kid with my parents growing up.
Okay, so let's just say you want to go to Lake George, New York. You don't know what you really want to do, but you're going to go. And let's say you're going to plan to be there in the next 18 months. We'll just make that up, right?
Okay, sure.
Why wouldn't you reach out to folks, business owners, employers, hiring managers, local chambers of commerce, the people that are doing the work or causing the work to get done? Why wouldn't you reach out to them and go, hi, I'm Lucas. I'm looking at moving into the Lake George, New York area. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what your company does because it's interesting to me. Could you spare 15 minutes for a virtual or real cup of coffee, depending on. Now, not everybody will say yes, but I think you'll be shocked how many folks will.
And
most folks want to help.
To expand this comparison, before we went into major combat operations in Iraq, you can be fairly certain that there were folks that were on the phone with Iraqi Republican Guard commanders and sliding some money under some tables and getting some people to agree to surrender when they made first contact. I mean, that's just setting yourself up for success.
It is. It is. You want to build a network of allies, right? And that network of allies, and here's a shift, I think, if we could bounce this around a little bit.
Sure.
I like the way you open the door with, you got to consider the enemy, and Sun Tzu say, know your enemy, and we don't want to call the employer the enemy. What if we were to shift and say the employers are our potential allies?
There you go. And actually, I've heard it compared to partnering with a foreign military. We want to influence. We want to become. We want to be a part of their culture. We want to influence their organization. We want to help that organization be successful. So I think you could make that comparison.
Yeah. So, I mean, many folks have worked with, allied forces and worked in joint operations, whatever. I think if we could make the mental shift for our transitioning service members from the employers are maybe the enemy to they are potential allied forces. How do we figure out how to join forces, right?
I love it.
And you don't join forces with allied nations or other military organizations until you're convinced that their capability is credible in your mind, right?
Yeah, and by extension of that metaphor, don't join forces with somebody whose country you don't want to live in. If you don't want to live in Mongolia, you're probably not interested in partnering with any kind of a force. It's too cold for me. I think I'd like to partner with the Italian Air Force. That sounds like it suits me just fine.
Yeah, there you go. I wouldn't mind partnering with, friendly forces in, the Florida area because it's midwinter here in Ohio. And, the older I get, the less I like winter.
I hear that. Okay, so let's talk for a second. Last step in the defense. Really, there is no last step in the deliberate defense, right? You start when? You start now because you don't know when the enemy's coming. You continue position improvement until when? Until you have contact and it's time to start shooting, or you get a mission to go do something else. So some of us can remember running 2-wire to TA-312s, to every hole, to the battalion talk, to the company talk, to the adjacent forces. I think of that in terms of networking, my peers, other organizations. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the metaphor you're using is kind of a method, how do you network? But I think it's important. And yes, it's got to be redundant and you got to have, connectivity all the way around. And that's great. And you have to build that. It just doesn't magically appear, in the dirt. But I want to take a step back.
Sure.
Because a lot of times when I talk with folks, I ask them what networking is. And they give you and there's a lot of good definitions out there. Oftentimes they describe the process by which you network. And I say, well, wait a minute. What is it though? And I get a lot of different answers. What works for me, what I like to suggest is that networking isn't some big fancy nebulous thing. Networking is nothing more than a conversation with a purpose. That's it. It's a conversation with a purpose. And you have to understand what your purpose is when you engage in that networking activity. Now, ultimately, your purpose when you're in career transition is to land some great new gig that checks all the boxes, right?
Absolutely.
So you're going to keep that in the back of your mind, right? It's like the overarching objective, right? But in a networking engagement, I'll suggest it's also important to have objectives and purpose for that engagement. For example, maybe you're pretty new in your transition work and you're not really sure what your personal pitch or elevator pitch is, and you want to go practice it. And maybe you're in an area where people can actually get together and shake hands and connect, right? Maybe your purpose that day is to just go practice your elevator pitch 4 times with 4 different people. Maybe that's it. Just get some reps, because you do get better at this with reps, right? Maybe your purpose is a little more sophisticated, and maybe your purpose there is to meet 2 new people from a particular industry or company you're interested in. Or maybe it's to meet a particular person focused on a particular job to establish first contact and set a second meeting. Whatever the purpose is, if you don't know what it is, you're not likely to optimize the networking opportunity. Yeah.
Right.
You may just go have conversation and go, wow, Bill was a nice guy. And that's all they remember.
And I've heard people say, hey, things like informational interviews are informal interviews. And I get it. And some say, well, don't have an agenda. And I said, well, I disagree. You're using agenda in a very negative connotation here. Yes, it's an informal interview. But if you're deliberate in your approach, then everything you're doing leading up to your transition ought to have a reason. Right? You didn't dig that hole here because you just felt like it. It looked like a nice spot. It's because you have interlocking fields of fire at 2/3 the maximum effective weapon range, right? Because this is a great position. You have good observation, right? So when you're making those connections, connect with people who may be decision makers, may be informational. They have things that they can tell you. Ask questions. That coffee is great, and that connection is great, and that conversation is great, but it should lead you one step further in the process of figuring out what it is you're doing and how you're going to do it.
Yeah, I use this little mental model in a lot of different ways, but there's the what and there's the so what. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to go network today. Well, so what?
Yeah.
What does that mean? What's your objective? What's your purpose? And I like the word you used, agenda, because it does have a negative. They had an agenda. Okay, and I think I agree with people's resistance to that. But an agenda and a purpose are 2 different things. So what's my purpose? Well, my purpose is to meet somebody from XYZ company because I'm interested in learning more about it. Great, that's a purpose. Now, the other thing I hear from folks in transition, military and civilian, is I don't really want to network because I think it's manipulative.
Right.
And I said, it could be if you do it wrong. And I'll suggest the difference between doing it right and wrong is one of intent. If you're going into a contact with the intent to get whatever you want and need and have no regard for the other person, that's manipulation.
At all costs, yeah. But you should look for that win-win, right?
Absolutely.
I could be a great employer. I could be a great employee. You could be a great employer for me. Let's find some common ground.
Absolutely. If you go into a networking conversation with the intent to present your purpose, make a connection, make your ask, whatever it happens to be. But you're also there to say, you know what, I'm here to help. How can I help you? That right there, in my mind, changes it from manipulation to effective networking.
Right. Hey, how can I be a solution to a problem you have?
Yeah.
Amazing. And those job fairs are out there. The networking opportunities abound. Anthony wanted to make a point of all this talk about digging holes and running 2-wire that we're showing our age, or that I'm showing our age. But I'm going to rope you into it. Looks like we're both showing our age. Thanks, Anthony. Always a good time to take ground combat operational advice from somebody who was in the Navy. All right, Bill, I wish we had all day, and I wish we just could keep going, but there is a limit to the amount of time that we can capture people's attention, so I want to close strong. Bill, if you had just one piece of advice for a transitioning service member looking to make all the necessary preparations for contact with the civilian employment marketplace, what would you give? What would you tell them?
Well, first, I think you need to understand that you really have 2 key things to do in transition. One is to get prepared, and 2 is to get known. You got to remember that neither of those things happen overnight. So regardless of when your anticipated transition is, you need to start now. And by starting now, you need to start by focusing on you. Who are you? What do you bring into the party, good, bad, or otherwise? How do you define success? If you can start now, understanding who you are, what you're bringing to the party, and how you define success, that's a first step to helping you do the 2 key things in transition, which is to get prepared and to get known. The rest of it, if you're dedicated over time, you'll learn it. And with reps, you'll get good at it. You know, over, what is it, 90, we got, 95% veteran employment right now? If you want to work and you do the work, you're going to find work, okay? But it doesn't happen magically.
It's not going to have that hole ain't going to dig itself.
Right.
Though I wish it would have. Bill, hey, on behalf of Recruit Military and the folks that joined us, a lot of great folks on the show today getting ready to retire. And just one more affront to Anthony, who wants to make fun of my age. Thanks, Mike. They're still out there running 2-wire, so we're not that old. Bill, thanks for sharing your advice, guidance, and wisdom with our veterans, transitioning service members, mill spouses, and the folks in the audience who are getting ready to retire. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to join. If anybody wants to hear anything more, give me a shout.
And I understand you've got looks like you've got a little bit of promo back there. Tell us what you got behind you and what you got coming on next year or this year.
Yeah, okay. So the right behind me there, that's the cover of the book, came out July 21. Military Career Insights from the employer side of the desk. It helps kind of give a peek behind the curtain on what employers are looking for. And, I guess big news here. Second book, we're 65,000 words into, looking for maybe around Memorial Day 23. That will be an extension of this going, well, now I landed. What do I do?
Awesome. And we're all looking forward to that. I know I am. So try to get me an advance copy if you can. All right. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, and folks, if you haven't already done so, do yourself a solid. Use the link rmvets.com/live. That'll take you to our website. You'll find over 400,000 job opportunities from 16,000 employers. You'll find information about job fairs held monthly nationwide, in person and virtual, as well as a library of content, all designed to help veterans, transitioning service members, and mill spouses just like yourself find meaningful employment. That about wraps it up for us today. Thanks for tuning in. Join us next week when 2 digital professional networking powerhouses, the very LinkedIn legends themselves, Matt Quick and Jose Velasquez, join us on the show. You can bet it'll be informative, and knowing those guys, it'll be fun. Until then, this has been Lucas Connolly for Recruit Military Live. Good luck and Godspeed.